Hey guys, this is Jeff with I Download Blog. Let's talk about the new podcast app. This is an app that had long been rumored to be in the works. Well, it is finally available for download for everyone on iOS 5.1 or above. So, this is the new podcast app. Let's check it out. You have right here the main screen that you get to once you open the app. You can see I've already downloaded a podcast right there, the Steve Jobs All Things D podcast there. But basically on this screen, there are three main buttons. You have the podcast button, you have the top stations, and then you have the catalog button. So there's three main interface elements here that you're going to find. And then at the top, you're going to have a search option, you're going to have edit options, and a display options as well. So let's go ahead and delete that podcast there. You can search. And along with that, there are also some display options that you have here. You can display in a list if you want to do that. Now let's talk about one of the primary functions of the podcast app, the top stations function. And this allows you to actually browse through various stations, either in video mode or in audio mode. So you can choose which type of podcast you're interested in using the little button right here, the toggle at the top. So as you can tell, right now I'm in video mode, so it's displaying video podcasts. If I swipe that over and change it to audio mode, it'll only show audio podcasts. And notice Sesame Street disappeared because that is a video podcast. So that is how you easily switch between the two types. Now, right here is the dial that you can use to change channels. It's like an old school radio dial, so you can just switch between channels just with a swipe. And really what's interesting about this is that some, like TV and film, are just one self-contained channel, while others have sub-channels. For instance, technology, gadgets, podcasting, tech news, etc. So not every single channel has multiple sub-channels, but some of them do. And then you can find or key in on exactly what you're looking to listen or view using the podcast app. So that is a really nice feature. It's a visual feature that helps you really drill down to the content that you're looking for. Now, of course, each channel or sub-channel has multiple podcasts associated with that particular channel. For instance, here on Society and Culture, there are multiple podcasts that I can swipe up and down to view. Now, not all the album art has loaded just yet. That's a little slow on that. But as you can see, there are about 4 different podcasts within the Society and Culture channel, and I can actually tap and listen or manage that individual podcast itself. For instance, Freakonomics Radio. If I want to check out that, I can just tap the little info button here and look and get some details on who's the author and what podcasts are available, when they were available, a description of each individual podcast, etc. And I can also subscribe from this screen or tap the individual podcast and start listening right there. I don't actually have to subscribe to start listening. And look at this interface. Apple has really put a lot of attention to detail into this interface. You get a reel-to-reel tape deck look right there with this audio podcast, and you can actually switch between the speed settings here, which is interesting. You have a rabbit denoting fast speed and a turtle, of course, denoting the slow speed. You can adjust the speed settings just by moving that toggle. You can also set a sleep timer for your audio podcast by tapping the little bell button, and you have various options for your sleep timer, various minutes, or when the podcast ends. You can share your podcast via email, tweet, or iMessage. And there's just a lot of options here. Of course, you have your volume and your transport control. You can skip podcast, play, skip 30 seconds, go back 10 seconds, use AirPlay controls, etc. And you can also subscribe directly from the play interface right there, or skip to another podcast, check out additional podcasts right from there. So a lot of functionality built right into the part of the app where you actually play your podcast as well. So that's the audio portion. I know you probably are wondering to yourself, what does the video portion look like? What does the interface on that look like? Well, let me show you right now. Let's just switch over and toggle over to our video podcast. And it's the same interface as far as sorting through which podcast you want to listen to. Of course, you'll have different podcasts because this is video, not audio only. So if you tap on the podcast there, it'll open up the play window and it'll start playing immediately. Of course, you have some controls where you can speed up your podcast or slow down the podcast as well. This one doesn't appear to want to play though. So what we're going to probably do is just go back there and choose another podcast. Let's just swipe over until we find something that we want to listen or watch. Let's see. How about NPR music? How about that? That's usually pretty reliable. All right. So we are playing right now. You can see the video right there on the screen. And of course, the interface is substantially different than it is for the audio only podcast, but you don't need as many options. You're just watching, there's no sleep timer involved, etc. So that is the video portion of the top stations. And again, you can subscribe here, you can get info on these individual podcasts, you can download them, queue them up for later, etc. So that was a fairly in-depth overview of the top station function. Let's head over to our podcast tab and let's check this out now. Just as you would expect, you can browse the contents of the podcast. You can choose and look at all the various episodes. You can get more info on the podcast. You can sort by list if you want to sort by list. You can see how many unplayed episodes you have. Just a lot that you would expect here. I mean, there's really nothing surprising. You can delete a podcast if you choose to do that. And what's really nice is that you can actually search for a podcast or search for the contents within a podcast. Say we want to search on the word, I don't know, Glenn. How about that? Let's search for Glenn. You see Glenn Hansard and another Glenn I saw there. So let's just type in Glenn and you can see it'll actually search for the word Glenn on that particular podcast. So there are 4 different episodes of the NPR podcast that contain some rendition of the word Glenn. Now, for those of you who enjoyed the previous way that podcasts work using iTunes, etc., if you tap the catalog button in the upper left-hand corner, you get the familiar iTunes interface that you're probably used to. This is basically the iTunes interface baked into the new podcast app, and it's a good alternative for those who are used to this. They don't want to switch to that new top stations option. You can still search through your podcast here, and that will download directly to the new podcast app. So you can find all your top charts, all your podcasts within the top charts. You can search on specific podcasts. And frankly, it's a more easy, straightforward way to find exactly what you're looking for. The top stations, while nice from a visual perspective, can be a little cumbersome in my opinion. So this really gets right down to the meat and potatoes of the subject. And you probably will find it easier to find what you're looking for. Now, granted, it's not as visually appealing as the top station. It doesn't have as much built-in connectivity as top stations, but it is an option. And it's good that Apple left that option in here. Now, once you actually have a podcast on your device in the podcast app, how do you go about actually managing that podcast? Well, it's easy. You just tap on the album art, tap on the podcast itself, and then you'll see options like subscription, where you can toggle on or off the subscription. You can sort the podcast. You can have auto download on or off. You can choose which episode you want to keep. You can keep up to the last 3 episodes, 2 episodes, 5 episodes, 10, the most recent, all of them, if you want to do that. So as you can see, there's a fair amount of the basic management features that should be standard for any podcast app. Now, granted, if you're coming from a paid app like Instacast, for instance, you may not find as many of the bells and whistles that you may be used to. But again, keep in mind that this is a free download and it's a 1.0 release. If you're coming from Instacast or something like that, I still recommend you give it a try just to see how you think it stacks up. If you've never used a dedicated podcast app whatsoever on the iPhone, then I highly recommend that you try out the new podcast app because it's definitely worth your time. So let me know what you guys think about Apple's new release. How do you think they've done? Let me know what you think in the comment section. This is Jeff with iDownload Blog.